you are talking to yourself and you're focusing on something that cascades to the rest of your system, you have so much power. And I think we lose sight of that because we're so externally focused. So it's all about bringing back that power as the conductor of this orchestra, the organizer of this community of 50 trillion cells.
You're already breathing, right? Like, it doesn't take extra time, or you do it, the less effortful it gets. It comes with ease. It comes with so many benefits. And, it's not woo-woo. I really want people to consider this is based in science.
What is the biggest objection that you hear? Like, why is this a thing? Like, why do we have to convince people to take control of their breath?
So one of the things I absolutely love about the Happy and Human podcast is the amount of meaningful connections that it really sparks, inspires, amplifies. It is so cool to see, Dinesh. I'm so grateful to you for our partnership and this creation that we get to do every single week. This past, actually, just before we hit record, I had one of my now new friends, Penny, reach out to me, and she said that she really loves our podcast because it inspires her to learn about and connect with women that she wouldn't normally have met otherwise.
Yeah. Shout out to Penny the Baker. Hey, Penny, how are you?
She's a diehard listener. She's, my walking buddy and my definitely my go-to for if I ever want a cookie fix.
Yeah.
She's very talented, but she also just really filled my cup when she shared with me that, why she loves our podcast so much. And I don't know, Dinesh, I think that the people we get on here are just so incredible and so inspirational.
Yeah, it is frankly the highlight of doing the podcast. It's having these conversations and then watching sort of the spider web really lead from one person to another. And we have an amazing guest who is sitting here quietly and like a good Indian boy, who was introduced to us by none other than Nilu, right? Nilu put us in touch. And he is someone that I've become friends with, to be perfectly honest. And I think just until yesterday, I thought he lived in Chicago, but lives in San Diego. We have Nikhil, who is a fellow podcaster and someone who has taken an unconventional, path that has broken the mold for a lot of what South Asians think that their life should go. And we're just so happy to have Nikhil on the show today. Welcome, Nikhil.
Hey, Dinesh. Hey, Seema. So glad to be here with you guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
This is going to be a great show. I just know it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Nikhil, I tried to do a little bit of an introduction for you, right? And Seema gave a little bit as well. But, we can't do you justice because you're so many things. You wear so many hats. You're a force of nature. And most of all, you're an inspiration to a lot of people. So tell us a little bit more. Give us your version of who is Nikhil and what we can expect out of today's show.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dinesh. It's so funny because I've got about, I think, 80 plus episodes in the can on my show. And so I'm very practiced in synthesizing bios for other people. But then when it comes to myself, I kind of get tongue tied and I'm like, where do I start? And, how do I keep this 30,000 foot view, but also, convey the important points? But I guess if I were to take a couple taglines, number one, as you mentioned, is podcaster. I am the host of the Untether Your Life podcast, and that is what I would call the hub of the Untether Your Life platform, which I launched with my wife, Shelly, which it really encompasses a couple different channels. Number one is obviously the podcast. Number two is books that Shelly and I have written together. The main one would be a memoir that we wrote about our lived experience with mental health in the South Asian diaspora. And then, as I was telling you guys before the show, she's just taken it in so many different directions. She's really my inspiration. She's written a book about mindfulness on the go, somatic experiencing, and then another one about her relationship with her father who passed last year. And then, so we've also got a regenerative medicine company that Shelly actually launched about 5 years ago, and we can delve into that a little bit. That's still obviously in the picture, but I would say the focus of my energy and my passion is the Untether Your Life platform,
Mm.
podcast. Also a father of three, very broad range. My oldest is 20. She's a sophomore in college. I have a 16-year-old who is a junior in high school. And then my youngest, who, like your kid, Dinesh, is also a Lionel Messi in training.
Mhm.
Huge soccer enthusiast. So I guess that would make me a soccer dad.
Amazing.
And yeah, so as we were talking about before the show, I am a recent transplant to San Diego from Chicago. I had spent close to 5 decades, which I still am coming to grips with actually saying that word in relation to myself. But yeah, 5 decades in the Midwest. So very happy to be out in Southern California. Love the energy, love the vibe out here. And yeah, just really excited to see where this conversation takes us.
I think one of the first places we want to go is your skincare routine and how you look so young. I mean, you're telling me you got a 20-year-old,
Yeah.
5 decades in the Midwest, and you look like you're 25 years old.
Man. Tell me, Dinesh, after the show, make sure I got your mailing address where I could send the thank you payments there.
That was
I
great.
would say clean living, and I guess I don't know, maybe like I don't know if people out there will if they have the receipts, they can question that. But I try to clean living, clean
Don't hit
thought,
up
yeah,
your
all that good stuff. Just about
don't hit up
living the
your tax
vibration. Yeah.
accountant.
What's that?
Don't hit up your tax accountant. Or
There you go.
Yeah, so good. So good.
so good. Yes. Nikhil, you mentioned clean living, and I think it's so interesting because that's not where you started, right? You kind of alluded to that as I totally talked over you, but you know what? It's Women's History Month, so whatever. Men talk over me all the time, and they don't feel bad about it. So I talked over you, and hopefully you don't feel bad about it. If you do, sorry. Actually, not sorry.
This is getting pretty confrontational right at the outset here, huh?
I listened to America Ferrera's dialogue or monologue from the Barbie movie earlier today, and I'm feeling it. No, but in all seriousness, it is so interesting to hear you say clean living really is a part of kind of how you physically look like from the outside, because that wasn't always the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what's that about? What was behind the shift?
Yeah, so yeah, that's actually that's an interesting question. I've never thought about it that way. But when we talk about clean living, I mean, there's obviously the standard things you think about, like nutrition, exercise, skincare, which again, Dinesh, I kid you not, I have no skincare secrets by any means. But those are the main things that we think about. Those are sort of the pillars of clean living.
Yeah.
But I really think that clean living starts with um, how you talk to yourself and your dialogue with yourself. And what I had alluded to yesterday, you and I spoke, is remembering that when we look in the mirror, we shouldn't just see one body; we should see a community, and
Yeah.
that is of 50 trillion cells. Which is,
Yeah.
I'm lifting that from Bruce Lipton, who, if you haven't read about him, just go out and buy his book, Biology of Belief. But yeah, I would say that the internal dialogue that I had with myself was not healthy.
Mhm.
And that was informed a lot by my membership in the South Asian diaspora, which is, as you guys talk about on your show also, which is very achievement driven. It's very predicated on the if then fallacy, which is, what our parents grew up with, which is just that, I'll keep my head down. I will just work my ass off, you know, health concerns be damned. Let me just keep my nose to the grindstone, get that title, get that fancy house, that car. And, as we all know, I mean, it's all, I have to ask, can I curse on this show, or is it PG rated, or I can?
We don't want to filter you. So
Okay.
please
I
feel
was going
free
to say,
to.
as we all know, this is all bullshit because there is so much that the body stores. As I have a book on my shelf here, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
Such a
Good
great book.
We look at our parents, and I don't know about you guys, but I mean, our parents, their health is terrible. They did what they had to do because they were running an outdated operating system. They were running an operating system that was necessary as an immigrant. You had to make shortcuts. You had to deprioritize things that were important for survival. So no hate on them, but the point is, this is not a winning recipe for our generation. And so, Seema, to answer your question about clean living, I can talk about, the alcohol, the partying, just all the stuff that kids do in college. But I would say the broader issue is just the negative self-talk and the
Hmm.
constant kind of self-berating based on this comparison. I was really mired in the comparison trap. I went to a very competitive school, which was Washington University in St. Louis. Lot of fellow Daisies, lot of pre-meds, not surprisingly. But it just really was this self-flagellating approach where it was just like, I feel like crap, so let me just, drown my sorrows in alcohol and this vicious cycle. But by the grace of God or the universe or whatever you want to call it, I mean, I found somebody who really believed in me in my mid-20s, and that's my amazing wife, Shelly. She really saw the essence behind a lot of this self-defeating behavior, and she's always been in my corner. And so, I give her so much credit. Obviously, while acknowledging that I was the one who did the work as well, to get on that right path and to get off that road to ruin that I was on.
Yeah. So powerful, because I think, as society, we get these messages and they're twisted, right? Like, oh, when you turn 21, the thing to do is to drink. When you go to college, you drink and you party. That's what you do.
Right.
You drink to relieve stress. You party to relieve stress. You do other things to relieve stress. And it's all of these modalities are escapisms. And at least for me, I wonder how much of this is because it's based on this, to your point, talking about self-talk, based on this messaging that I can't handle this stress. And so I'm going to avoid it and or incorporate all of these broadly accepted, everybody's doing it things because that's how I fit in.
Right.
It's my way of saying that I actually can hang. I remember in dental school, that was like a huge thing, right? Like this whole first month was a blur because every night we were just getting to know each other. We were just getting to, like we're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and it was a lot of alcohol. And if you didn't go out with them, with the rest, and by them the class or whatever, you missed out on quote unquote connection, right? Yep. You weren't part of the group, and I think that that's true regardless of whether you're in any sort of grad school, college, and even you were in a really, really high pressured, high stakes career.
Yep.
And that's kind of the thing to do.
It's funny you mentioned that, Seema, because that could apply to my career in consulting. I was in management consulting at PwC, and what they called team building was shorthand for just basically destroying your liver. Just going out drinking till the wee hours of the morning, out karaoke bars in New York City, and it seems like a lot of fun, but as we talked about, the body keeps the score. It's not just about what it's doing to your liver; it's also about what it's doing to your internal dialogue or your internal monologue, whatever you want to call it. And that is the exact antithesis of what I had alluded to earlier, which is clean living.
So, how does or from your experience, like let's say there's a listener out there, and for the first time they've stopped and thought about their internal dialogue, right? Like because it can happen so quickly that we're not really sure that where that voice or that judgment or whatever is coming from, right? So someone comes along and says, "Hey, do you want to go ice skating?" And very quickly they're like, "No, I don't want to go because I'm clumsy," or whatever pops into their head, and they accept it as a fact, right? So help us or help the listeners if there's someone listening and they're like, you know what, maybe I do have this inner critic that's a negative voice that's berating me, and the results of that, the effects are still yet unknown to me. How do we separate that voice, start to identify it, and then what do we do to start to neutralize it? Because I do agree, and Seema worked with Sherzad Kamin, and he starts out, his entire thing is about he was judging other people.
This is the positive psychology guy you're talking about?
Yeah. Positive intelligence.
Positive intelligence, right?
Yeah, right.
And he was judging other people, and it really came from the fact that he was tired of judging himself. Right? And I think we're talking about at some level the same things. So what were the steps, or what did you do to go from an unclean inner dialogue to capture it, get a hold of it, and move towards a cleaner living?
Yeah, so I love that question. I mean, I guess I can, as they say, kind of start with the punchline and then work my way backwards.
Yeah.
But really, to present day, Dinesh, is it sounds very, and I'm following Seema's, uh, you know, guidance or what's the best word I can say? But not to use the word, but it's the only word I can use. It's the only adjective I can use, and that's woo woo.
Hmm.
I know we've talked about, like, but it sounds a little bit woo woo, but I would really say what has helped me to quiet that chatter has been focusing on the breath.
Hmm.
And it's something that's so powerful and easy to implement, but it's something that's so underutilized. And it is something that I have made just the crux of my daily care and daily practice. I mean, I always equate it to when people say I can't get on a breathwork routine or I'm too busy in the morning. I always talk about like a person with a kidney disorder, like, they are on dialysis. They don't sit there
Hmm.
and say, oh, I just don't have time in my day for dialysis. It's something that's a must, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really what has been just my saving grace is to just think about, when I inhale, I basically say to myself, there's this amazing meditation through a gentleman named Thich Nhat Hanh, who, Dinesh, I have to ask you, did you get his book yet, or have you started reading it, or
No, I
you are
have
here?
his book. I just haven't started reading it yet. There are so
Okay,
many books that there to read
yeah,
that they go on a list, a book list, and
yeah.
then I'll get
Okay.
there. But
Well,
yeah, I've heard a lot
at
about
least
him.
it's serving as a paperweight, I hope. But
Yeah.
um, no, so the thing is, I bring him up, and I don't want to, get too far off on a tangent, but there are these just simple breathing techniques that I follow every day, Dinesh.
Mhm.
There's one I
Yeah.
do in the morning, but throughout the day, where it's just basically focusing on breathing. So I just say basically breathing in, I know I'm breathing in, breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. And just think about that. Think about, there's different terms you can use like neuro-linguistic programming or whatever, technique you want to, fancy mumbo jumbo you want to use. But basically, you are programming your cells, you're programming your system to operate more like what I would call like the New York Philharmonic rather
Hmm.
than, traffic in Times Square. Think about that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because think about everything is energy, as we've talked about, right? And so basically, when you are talking to yourself and you're focusing on something that cascades to the rest of your system, you
Hmm.
have so much power. And I think we lose sight of that because we're so externally focused. So it's all
Mhm.
about bringing back that power as the conductor of this orchestra and as sort
Mhm.
of the organizer of this community of 50 trillion cells.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I really, Nikhil, I know we talked about this on your podcast yesterday, um, because it is so important. It is so critical. You're already breathing,
Yeah.
right? Like it doesn't take extra time. And it's kind of like one of these things where, the more you do it, the less effortful it gets. It comes with ease. It comes with so many benefits. And, it's not woo woo. I know I've said it, you've said it. And I've come back to this because I really want people to consider, you know, this is based in science. This is
Hmm.
based, yes, in our ancient Vedic scriptures and practices and culture. And it's also, there's tons of research behind it
Yep.
that we fail to recognize the power of our breath and
Hmm.
how it really truly is life changing. It is a modality where you can take quantum leaps into a different existence altogether
Hmm.
simply by channeling your breath. And I love that you talk about this so passionately and so matter of factly. You've gone on and you've become a breathwork instructor. You've done the work
Yeah.
to actually learn, more so than just say, you're not just saying things, you're actually walking the talk. And
Right.
it's incredible to hear about how it's impacting your life. And thank you for sharing also just ways we can make this more accessible without making it a thing, right? Without
Hmm.
adding to our already full plates.
Yeah. And that's the thing is in this world, I see the thing is, okay, so when we talk about yoga, there's this misnomer that you have to be super flexible and you have to contort your body into like a pretzel shape and strain yourself and just really, have a yoga mat. And what is it? Alo Yoga. Is that the brand? I don't know what,
I mean, there's
it's
tons of brands,
by
right? Like,
Lululemon or all this stuff, right? And I think people really overthink it. We really
yeah.
get in our own way because we just let the intellect kind of take over and just rationalize and try to plan out. And we get in what, is known as the do trap, where it's just like, let me buy the latest thing. Let me, get the membership to Bari Yoga or whatever, Bikram Yoga, some center.
Yeah.
And it's so simple. It's literally just about using what like you said, using the technology that you have at your, not fingertips. The equivalent would be with lung tips or whatever. But the point is, you have this immense, this feat of engineering, this miracle at your fingertips. So just use it. And basically, there's so many resources online. You don't have to go and get a certification like I did. I mean, I went to, as I was telling Dinesh, I went to Ibiza for a retreat, got certified. But yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of finding the resources. And also, I would say it's a matter of finding that accountability partner. It's about, as we talk about in our culture, the concept of sangha, the concept of community that will keep you accountable. And I think what's interesting is during the pandemic, I'd love to hear your guys' experience, but in a way, it's like the connections in real life or IRL, I would say, they're still there, but because of the logistics, because it was harder to see people online, paradoxically, it's like my community expanded exponentially because the geographic boundaries just evaporated, and there are people that I was connecting with, in Australia, in the UK, just in India, all over the world. So it's kind of like that silver lining to the cloud, which was, the horrible pandemic that we went through. So.
Yeah. And I think not only that, but we all had a shared experience with the pandemic, right? You came to understand that something that allegedly started in China impacted the way I went to the grocery store here. And so the world got really small. And the flip of that is that we could all connect with each other a little bit more. But I want to go back to the breath work. So let's say I'm curious that this seems fascinating, seems something I want to learn more about. Help us understand, why does bringing some intentionality to your breathing, how does that help me arrest that inner critic or the runaway mind, right? How does it tame that 2-year-old toddler that's just running around and tending towards chaos and bring some order and structure to our lives? Because I think what you're saying is really insightful. I think that it's through the order and structure that we can bring this community of how many ever 53 million trillion cells to sort of line them up as an arrow. You know that cartoon of like a bunch of bees and then they turn into an arrow and then they can actually go do something, where you sort of organize sort of an organized progress. But so why does the breath help with that, and what is its connection with getting our thoughts straightened out?
Yeah, I love that question, and that, obviously could be an episode in and of itself. But
yeah,
as we know with the nervous system, it's kind of a mystery, but there's really two different systems. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. And so with the sympathetic system, that is what is often equated with fight or flight or freeze, right? And that's just a holdover from our prehistoric ancestors, whereas basically they were trying to survive in the midst of all this danger. So Seema and I talked about this. There's this concept of guides and guards, right? So the guards are really they're there to keep you safe. They're there to protect you. But the challenge is just that a lot of times we stay in that state of fear. We stay in that state of panic. And I'm guilty of this just as much as the next guy, where it's like, I get a notification on my text or my bank, this transaction is over your limit, or, there's some crisis du jour at work. And so obviously, as we know, like with the sympathetic nervous system on high alert, there's all these molecules that are just going through your body, like cortisol, and it leads to really flawed decision making. It leads to this acting out of what we call scarcity mindset, right? So the way to equilibrate, get yourself sort of grounded, is to leverage the parasympathetic nervous system, which is also known as rest and digest. And so that is basically what's going to allow you to make decisions from, it's not like a flip the switch type thing, but it's going to go in the continuum more towards the abundance mindset, and just tapping into your intuition and tapping into, okay, I won't say woo woo, but tapping into your higher self, and not just focusing on just the here and now, because that can be very detrimental where you're just sort of making these knee jerk decisions. You're thinking about, and I also equate it to widening the lens, right? Think about like, you take your kid to the park and he sees like, I don't know, this is kind of a weird example, but he just sees a big rock. Is he going to be excited? No. But like, let's say he widens his lens and he now sees the swing sets and the tilt-a-whirl and all this stuff. So it's almost like you are basically the kid at the playground and you're widening your focus from that negative stimulus to something broader. So that, just basically the sympathetic, I want to stress the sympathetic nervous system, it's there, it serves a purpose, it keeps us safe. But think about it like a smoke alarm when you're at your house. It's like, you've all been in that spot where the smoke alarm has low batteries and it just keeps beeping. Are you gonna just, I confess I've done this where I've just whacked the hell out of that thing and I just, but that's that is not that is not a best practice, I would say. It's not a best practice for your house. It's not a best practice for your mental health. You definitely do have to stay on alert. You definitely do have to go in with both eyes open. Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a parent, you have to keep your kids safe. Whatever the case is, yes, I think that is, it's definitely there to keep us safe, but also tap into that, that gentler side of, that different part of bringing your whole self, as you guys talk about on your show, is just bringing that more intuitive, wiser part of yourself. And so in addition to breath work, I mean, well, I wouldn't say in addition, but it's another facet of it, which is just what I would call what's it called, humming or chanting, and that is so powerful, Dinesh, because there's this, and Seema could probably talk about this for hours, but there's the vagus nerve, which is that is really what is associated with the rest and digest and that calming state of mind. So basically, if you're chanting, just like humming, like or if you do what our people do, which is chanting Om, that can be extremely powerful. So I find myself when I am in moments of stress, it's hard when you're at the bakery, you don't want to create a scene. You don't want to be like that. They're going to call security on you. But like if you're in your car, if you're in traffic or something, I mean, the power of Om, cannot be overstated.
Yeah, and I think it's a shared energy too. Now I'm kind of curious about what would happen if I did go in public and say, because you exude that out, right? You never know who that could shift. But what's coming to mind for me is, have you guys seen that movie 3 Idiots?
Yeah.
All is
My
well. Second cousin was actually in that movie. But
Oh, he was?
Yeah.
Amir Khan.
No, Omi Vaidya. He was actually on The Office too. So.
Oh wow.
Oh.
You know what I'm talking about?
That's your second cousin.
Yeah. He didn't actually speak Hindi before that. He's from, I think, New Jersey or something. But yeah.
Oh wow. That's cool.
Yeah, but go ahead. You were saying?
Sorry, my brain is still processing. But yeah, that's pretty cool. But I when I saw that movie, I think it came out when maybe I was
2009, yeah.
Yeah. So I had this big ego hat on around at that point in my life. But I thought it was totally weird that he was, I thought it was apt that the movie was named 3 Idiots because I thought that guy was an idiot just walking around going, all is well, and tapping.
Yeah.
Right. But that's kind of what came to mind for me when you were talking about vibrational, because energy is just vibration, it's frequency.
Right.
And so when you say things like Om and you tap, like that's another one that's really, really
talking
powerful.
About like EFT or something?
EFT tapping. Yeah. Because he was tapping. I don't know what the actual technical term is for tapping on your sternum, but I think he was doing that, or maybe the one on your third eye.
Okay.
I can't remember. Amir Khan, I'll have to go watch your movie again. But it is powerful. And I think it's important that you touched on on the fact that it's a frequency that you literally are emitting out
Yeah.
into the universe.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I loved how you framed it. It tied together a lot of things for me as you were talking, because basically the breath work, the tapping, whatever modality works for you, takes you out of limbic hijack,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
takes you out from a sort of myopic, acute focus on the stressor that's in front of you. Right, that guy cut me off, right? Or
Yep.
how could
Mhm.
this person be late? Or how can the waiter be so rude? Or whatever that myopic
Mhm.
focus you have. And like you said, puts you in that visionary where you are thinking that the world is abundant as opposed to scarce. And I was just listening to a podcast by the Diary of the CEO, Stephen Bartlett,
Mhm.
Mm.
and he talks about, and he had a guest, I forget his name, but it was a really well-known guest. But he talks about when you're sort of in this visionary, in this higher vibration, whatever term feels right to you, you kind of look at the world as one big puzzle, and that whatever resource you need, not that you're lacking it, but it's one conversation away, right?
Mm.
So let's say we want to get someone who's been in a Bollywood film on our show. Rather than thinking like, oh my God, who are we? Our podcast is so small, we can never do that. We could look at it from like, oh, it's one conversation away from Nikhil right now, right? Have you guys heard about this study where Indian sugarcane farmers were paid a lump sum after the harvest, and
Mhm.
they measured their IQ,
Mhm.
and then as they used their funds throughout the year before the next harvest, they went
Mhm.
from a full bank account to nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And as they progressed towards nothing, the necessities of daily life, buying food or paying for this or that, became a bigger concern relative to when they had all the money.
Mm-hmm.
And their IQ score was 15 points lower when they were stressed
Mm.
about making that payment. And you said it leads to faulty decision making when you're in limbic hijack.
Right.
So I think that is a really nice way to make it relevant to a lot of
Mhm.
people, that when we're sort of in this fight or flight mode, we're so almost only focused on preserving ourselves
Yep.
that any thought about anything outside of ourselves goes out the window, right? This is why there are sayings like, you can never take back the word that you say, like when you yell in anger or something.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about the relationship at that point. You're thinking about how wrong you were, right? So can you teach us on today's show a quick breathwork technique?
Yeah. I mean, there's one that I think is really very powerful, and it's what I would call portable. And it's called box breathing. But
Mm,
to be honest, Dinesh, I really think that the problem is what I've found is that people get so hung up in the mechanics of it. They're like,
Mhm.
oh, do I count 3, 4 times and then I hold and then I count out? So I would say like box breathing is something that for your listeners, I would say definitely go out if you're not familiar with it and implement that. But I want to take it back to what I was talking about earlier, Dinesh, with the breathing in. I know I am breathing in. So we can do that right now. So there's basically 4 components to that. And the shorthand
yeah.
would be in, out. It's this, it's the yin yang, the dichotomy thing. It's in, out.
Hmm.
Then deep, slow, calm, ease, and smile, release. Okay. So
Hmm.
basically we start out, we say, we can do it now. I mean, if we have time, but breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out.
Do we say that out loud?
I'll guide you through it, and then you can
Okay.
just sort of say them to yourself internally. But so we'll just go with that again. So it's breathing in,
Yeah.
breathing out, uh, deep, slow, calm, ease, smile, release. So I'll just use the words, and then you can just kind of tailor them to whatever works for your lungs or your system. But so it's in, out, and I want to highlight one thing is okay, so there's a lot of modalities out there, and I gotta say this, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but there are a lot of modalities out there where they talk about getting you into that hyper activated state where they do mouth breathing, and Wim Hof is one of them. And no disrespect, I think he's an amazing guy. But there's a lot of schools out there where they go, and that I cannot say, again, if that's your jam, totally fine. But the one I'm doing here, it's really important to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. So, because, and that's again another podcast in and of itself, but the nasal breathing is so important in terms of like the benefits that it affords. But when I'm teaching, what I always instruct people is do the in through the nose and out through the mouth. Okay. So we've already done the in, out. So the next is deep, slow, calm, ease, smile, release. So, how do you feel?
Grounded.
Yeah, Seema?
I mean, I have this nasty addiction to oxygen. It just feels so good.
Yeah.
Um,
I can't tell you. I mean, it's like we could we could solve so many of the world's problems. I mean, my mantra that I said in that article that I think you were referring to earlier, Dinesh, is I really feel like we can help humanity one breath at a time, And so going back to what I was saying earlier, it's that concept of Sangha, when if you can get yourself to like a breathwork retreat, you don't have to be like a, certified instructor and go full out like I did, but there's something so powerful about breathing in a group with a really guided facilitator who can really take you into these ecstatic states. I mean, not to get too far off tangent, but they were literally like, when people talk about psychedelic therapy, right, they talk about how it's this powerful thing and how they had so many breakthroughs. And I've never done it, but I have heard amazing things. But if you know anything about psychedelic therapy, there are also some risks, and it's not, I don't know you probably more well versed in the laws than I am, but like, I think it's still considered illegal in the US. I know there's some changing legislation, but again, going back to breath work, I mean, I had some experiences, I'm not kidding you, where it was like the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita became so much more powerful to me, because Seema and I talked about this yesterday, where it's like being on the battlefield, not a literal battlefield, but being on the battlefield between good and evil and trying to find inner peace. That's what the Gita is all about. And when I am engaging in this breath work, this deep breath work in community, I literally felt myself on the battlefield, and just really feeling more equipped to solve a lot of those problems. Not just in terms of like, this touchy-feely stuff, but this has real ROI. This has tangible benefits for any business. There are people who are engaging in breath work. We've done it with our employees at our regenerative medicine company, and they rave about it. They were so stressed out, and they're asking for it. This is not one of those like, we gave all of our employees the 7 habits of highly effective people and forced them to go to a Stephen Covey thing. This is like they really wanted it. So I think that that's really my mission, is not just to, do breath work for shits and giggles. It's really to, how can I become a better father? How can I become a better business owner? And how can I just become a better person,
It has saved me arguments with my kids. It has saved me arguments with my spouse. It has saved me from, making less than desirable decisions. Like, they feel good in the moment, right? Like, I'm going to pour myself that glass of wine, or I'm going to, I don't know, have that entire chocolate bar, because, I mean, the breath has really, truly saved me. And I think it's really, I like how you said that, in other words, it's completely safe, completely legal. You can do it anywhere, anytime. You will always have access to your breath. And so I love that your mission really is helping people to utilize what they've already been given.
Yep.
Right? You don't need to pay for that.
Right.
You don't need special equipment. You don't need special training. You just you get to use the equipment that you've already been gifted in such a beautiful way to create different outcomes, different results. And so I'm really glad that you're one of these people out here who are advocating for it, making it mainstream, but importantly, making it mainstream in a way that still honors our culture. It's not a colonialized version of this, right? Like that's really, 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 truly important. I did have a question actually, because I was mentioning to our listeners, there's a lot of science behind this, right? And so there is, the dental hat on about maintenance of airway and where the tongue goes and all of that, right? Like there's all sorts of things that happen when we speak, particularly in Sanskrit, that's hitting the palate and stimulating our vagus nerves in different ways. That's why chanting these mantras is so powerful. But similarly to that, when you breathe through the nose, when you inhale, what I do know is that we get nitric oxide, right? Which is a powerful vasodilator.
Vasodilator, exactly. Yep.
Exactly. Reduces blood pressure. That's why we can regulate our heart rate, our respiratory rate. And it's one of the only places in our body that we can actually extract this beautiful life-giving force is through the nose.
Prana.
Why out through the mouth?
Why out through the mouth? That's actually a good question. I mean, I would say probably because of the volume. I think in terms of, if you think about when you exhale through your mouth, you have a far wider channel there, right? I think with the nose, the filtration, yeah, you're absolutely right. The vasodilator, but it's also, we have filtration capabilities in our nose when we inhale. It's really not, I wouldn't say it's irrelevant, but it's less relevant when we're breathing out because it's just, there's not that need for filtration. But yeah, that's my theory. Was that a question or was that a rhetorical question?
No, that was really a question. It's like, why breathing out? It makes sense to me that we wouldn't need to filter something that's coming out of our bodies,
right?
Because we're guarding and protecting when we're breathing in. But you're not the first person to mention breathing out.
A lot of people do actually breathe out through the nose as well, which is totally fine. But I will say, have either of you guys done a cold plunge by any chance? Have you guys tried that?
Yes.
I have not.
Oh man, it is. I tell you, like when you combine breathwork with a cold plunge, it is like the closest I've experienced to nirvana. I mean, it's because what happens is, and Seema, I'd love to hear your experience too, but you get in and that first 3 minutes is death. Like you you think you're going to die. I mean, it's so the amount of adrenaline that's coursing through your veins. But the way you get through that is what our instructor told us is just focus on your breath. Just put your hands together and just close your eyes. But once you break past that point, it's like whenever I feel like stressed out or something, I sort of mentally transport myself to that cold plunge pool. Actually, it was in Carlsbad, Dinesh, you were talking about.
Nice.
It was a place in Carlsbad, but yeah, that. But Seema, it was. Did you have a similar experience to that, or what was your?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've done it for longer than 3 minutes, to be perfectly. And now I'm like, oh, challenge accepted. But but yeah, no, and I don't know if it was really truly a cold plunge and that it wasn't ice water. But when it was like freezing here, I last winter would just jump in the pool. And it was like, I don't know, 50 degrees. But I would stay in. I would force myself at first to stay in for a minute. And then I would force myself to stay in for longer, and I would just sort of focus on. And then what I actually noticed was when I went in, the water will take your heat, right? So if you stay still, the water actually warms up. And then when you go to move, it's like whoosh, you're back in it again, right? So my experience hasn't been anything other than there's the biggest insight, I guess I will say, is that the greatest resistance is the pre, right? The pre-plunge. You're telling yourself, your ego's talking, your fear is talking, your desire to stay comfortable and warm is talking, and you're just fighting it with every cell of your body. And what I noticed when I started doing this day in and day out last winter was by the third day, I was just hopping on it.
Yeah.
Like it was not a thing. My body didn't react so violently.
Right.
And that's when I was able to kind of encourage myself to stay in longer. And now that I think about it, I did, the longer I was able to stay in, the more I was able to focus on my breath because it was a nice distractor.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved it.
Yeah.
I'm imagining jumping into a cold plunge and only focusing on my breath to make sure it's still there, right? Because
Yeah, exactly.
like I got to hold on to this breath because it might leave me soon.
Yeah. But I tell you, I mean,
Yeah.
when people do the holotropic stuff, I mean, again, no disrespect, but I personally, it feels like it's kind of moving backwards because it's engaging that sympathetic, that, you know, but apparently it can be very effective in addressing trauma. So again, if that's your jam, have at it. You know, I prefer to have something that's more of a maintenance technique on a daily basis because you do that stuff every day, you'll short circuit your nervous system pretty quick.
Yeah. So how often do you cold plunge?
I've literally done it once.
Okay.
So, but I definitely want to do more of it. Yeah.
The reason I ask is because for those of you who have Netflix, there is a series by Chris Hemsworth on it called Limitless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Highly recommend. It is fantastic. But it's all about biohacking. Dr. I think it's Peter Attia that's on there as well. And they're kind of talking about things you can do in daily life to really increase your quality of life, your longevity, all of these things, and kind of reverse age yourself. And one of the things they talk about is exposing your body to temperature extremes, both heat and cold plunging. So they actually go to, I think, literally the polar ice caps there, and they cold plunge.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they talk about is you don't have to do that to that extreme. You can just do a 30-second shot of cold every single day in the shower to get that same effect.
Yeah. I've heard that before. If you end up thinking about it, like it makes a lot of sense. We live in this artificial 75-degree world, right? Wherever you are in the Western world, you're indoors, you're protected from the elements, because if you go back to before we had air conditioning and things like that, it got to the 50s at night and it got to the 90s in the day, right? At different times. But now with air conditioning, we've temperature controlled our existences so that it's very monotonic. And I think the thought behind that is, you use it, you lose it, right? If we're so accustomed to living in this narrow band, we're going to evolve to only being able to perform, excel, survive, and even thrive in that narrow band, and anything outside of that. So I think there's a lot of wisdom to what Seema just said about deliberately exposing yourself to extremes, right? Putting yourself through the paces. But I do have a question, Nikhil. I agree with you that the breath is there. It's available. It's zero cost to try, and what do you lose by trying it, right? So it leads me to the question of what is the biggest objection that you hear? Like, why is this a thing? Like, why do we have to convince people to take control of their breath if the benefits are so far-fetched, right?
Yeah.
What have you seen as the objection to people even wanting to try it? Because I'm convinced. I mean, I think the evidence and the use of it throughout time, and even in mass media like All Is Well, right, shows how we can just do better.
What was the thing you mentioned?
All Is Well from Three Idiots, where he's tapping on his and controlling his breath, bringing some awareness. Why do you think people are not, or is there any hesitation to adopting this?
It's just a matter of people getting in their own way. There's this beautiful illusion that I think really sums this up, is that I think when, this is from Thich Nhat Hanh also, he talks about how trying to absorb, he talks about dharma, right? Trying to absorb dharma through the mind is like trying to put a sheet of plastic wrapping on grass and expecting it to grow, right? And so the intellect really is that plastic wrapping, and the body is the grass. So we really have to basically take that sheet off and just listen to our body. And so people just engineer this stuff. They say, I don't have time for it. And that's my point, is it's just like they make it like it's something that is, and I'm the same way when it comes to like working out and stuff. I do this all the time. But I think honestly, if you make it like, if you think about it, something that's good for your body and it's a non-negotiable, then yeah, I mean, I think, and also you can do things like habit stacking that can be beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah. I think especially when you're in limbic hijack,
Mhm.
you're even more resistant, right? Like what if somebody were to come to you and say, that's why you need to calm down, is so ineffective, right? It's because you're already like at that heightened sense of you're looking for a fight.
Mhm.
And so what I love about what you're saying, you mentioned being stuck in traffic or washing your hand. I don't know if you said washing your hands, but you mentioned just normal habit stacking, daily things that you do where you're practicing it when you're not hijacked, when your guards are not talking, so that it becomes more accessible to you. And then over time, you didn't say this, but what I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm inaccurate in this, is that you're going to be less susceptible to those volatile hijacks that happen
Mhm.
because you're training your vagus nerve, you're training your brain, you're training your body
Yep.
to accept this different way of being.
Yeah.
You're widening your lens. I think that the
Right.
easiest way to sum it up is just that you're not just focusing on, you're basically like, think about life like an impressionist painting, right? You're at the museum, you go straight up, you see all the imperfections, you see all the, etchings and stuff, and it looks chaotic, but then you go back and you sort of see how everything is connected. It's about connecting those dots, like Steve Jobs said, right? Just stepping back, getting that perspective, and you have a very different takeaway from that versus when you're up front and sort of just
Yeah.
mired in sort of the thick of it. Yeah.
And it's giving you a tool that, over with the use of time, you can get yourself out of it. Like, let's say you fall into it, or something has triggered you, and you know it's not the right thing for you to be doing, or to engage in that potentially destructive behavior. It's not empowering you. It's not solving any problems. It's just making you feel good that you're being heard. Gives you a tool to pull yourself out of that. And with practice, I think that tools becomes really valuable the more accessible it is. And I think the only way you can make it valuable and accessible is by starting and practicing it, right?
Yep. And
Yeah.
the other saying I love is, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right? So
Yeah.
don't try to go for that 1 hour breath work session on Mind Valley, which we didn't get to, but maybe for another discussion. But like, there's
Yeah.
quests on there where it's like 5 minutes, an hour. Do what works for you, and don't set yourself up. Don't enforce this impossible standard, which a lot of our fellow overachievers in the South Asian diaspora do. Don't try to get to that, top of the mountain overnight. Give yourself some grace. Another thing that maybe another episode we can talk about is grace, space, and race. If you want to
Yeah.
get more on this mantra, check out my Instagram. Sorry, shameless.
Yeah. You have a really cool reel on what that actually
Yeah.
means and why it's effective. So listeners, go check it out. And we'll leave your handle in the show notes as well, so listeners can find you.
Yeah.
Nikhil, I've just loved, to your point, there's so many things I still want to ask, because you've just come from such an interesting tapestry of experiences put together that's landed you here. Like, you didn't wake up as this sage, wise person who knew to rely on their breath. You've had some unconventional experiences that have created this path for you here, with the support of your wife, but also because you chose to do the work. So thank you so much for coming and chatting with us about that. I do have to ask you, though, because I know this conversation hopefully has inspired people to look at ways they can change their own lives through their breath. But I want to give you yet another, I guess, opportunity, because I want to make sure that our listeners are super, super tuned in to get the max they can out of this. Let's change our lives. What's one thing someone listening to this right now can implement today, aside from the single breath, that you undoubtedly are just, they're gonna get benefit from?
I would honestly say, and okay, so I gotta stop doing this. I gotta stop saying I know this sounds cheesy. Screw it. I'll own it. I'll lean into it. And it's been beaten to death, but the point is gratitude. Just be very grateful that you're waking up every morning. Okay. Just remember that 50 trillion cell community that you have at your fingertips. Okay.
Mhm.
And I don't mean to diminish anyone's health issues. I mean, obviously there are people who are suffering with autoimmune disorders or, chronic conditions, and, my heart goes out to them. But just remember, this is another topic that's, maybe there should be maybe we should have a summit or something, but there is, the concept of epigenetics, which is really
Yeah.
important, is that just because your parents, your father had a heart attack at 40, or, your mother has really bad knees, it's not a foregone conclusion, right? Don't dismiss how much power you have over your fate. And don't think that, it's the analogy is just think about a blueprint, right? Think about the blueprint for a house. Is it something that the architect goes and turns on? No, it's something that the architect works with contractors and construction crews to build that house. So think about your genes as a blueprint, and you're the architect, right? You have that
Mhm.
ability to build the house or the destiny or the future or the company or whatever it is. You have so much creative capability, right? And this doesn't happen overnight. Okay. If I'd be lying if I told you that, like, you know, in my darkest days, when my wife and I were separated, when, I was losing that fifth job in a row. I mean, you can read all about it in Psychology Today. I mean, I went through some really shit times. So I'm not
Mhm.
going to say that like I've always been this enlightened yogi, and I'm not one today. But I make gratitude extremely central to every breath I take, and every
Mhm.
move I make. Sorry, Sting. I don't know. You charge me royalties like you did P.
It's a
Diddy, but
great song. Great
It's
song.
so
Hey,
but
good.
hey.
the point is, it's just like, I mean, just think about the fact that you're getting up every day, right? And think
Yeah.
about, this is a simple exercise, right? There's this, for any listeners, I would really recommend that one takeaway would just be check out Thich Nhat Hanh. He has an amazing meditation where it's like just simple act of drinking your morning coffee. If you're like me, I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of us, we just guzzle our Starbucks and we're out the door. We got to drop the kids off, get on the train. Just take that morning cup of coffee. Just think about, the heat that brought that coffee. Think about the beans. Think about everything that went into it, and just be grateful for that. You know,
Hmm.
think about the supply chain, whatever it is, whatever you want to think
Yeah.
about. Just think about everything that brought that cup of coffee to you, and I tell you, your life will flow with ease. It's not gonna,
Mm.
all your problems are not gonna vanish. But the best analogy I could use, it's almost like you're building a moat
Hmm.
around yourself for all the,
Yeah.
all the adversities that come your way.
So good. And you're not the first person on the show to say that. Gratitude and finding the privilege in a lot of things that we get to do. Even the hard work that you've got that's keeping you up all night and challenging you. That's a privilege that not everyone gets. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Be thankful for
but
Yeah.
pee on the seat, right, Seema?
Thank
well,
God for
yeah,
pee on the seat.
you got to be thankful for it.
Yeah. Guys, if you haven't, I don't know if my episode will come out before this one does,
Yeah.
but, check out Untether Your Life because thank God for pee on
Are
the
you
seat.
throwing down a challenge here? Let's see who can release their episode first.
I was not. I was not actually, but,
We got to see if Shannon, shout out to Shannon, hey, to help us get this out before Nikhil gets it out.
Yeah.
But hearing you talk, like I'm convinced, right? And I'm wondering if someone else is listening to this and they want to get more, learn more from you about breathwork.
Mhm.
So maybe listeners, if this sounds like, I'm going to propose something, if this sounds like a good idea, DM either Seema or I, and let us know if we brought Nikhil back for, let's say, a half an hour Zoom webinar, a 1 hour Zoom webinar, where he walks us through some guided breathwork exercises that
Yes.
we can learn. DM us, and look, we don't have it. I just thought about it. We're not. It's not. We're not going to sell anything or push anything. But if you're interested in that, we have access to Nikhil, and we're friends now. So he'll do us a solid, and we'll put this together, and whoever joins, and I think we can create this community that Nikhil's been talking about. That's so powerful, and arm us with some tools. So let us know.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds great. Love
You
it.
up for that, Nikhil? I just voluntold you.
No, I love it. I mean, I would be it would be a privilege. I mean, your community that you're creating here. I mean, it's not even a year into it, guys, and my huge props to you guys for and I don't know in terms of listener community what it's like, but just I feel the energy with your guests, and I feel that as Seema and I were talking about, there's a lot of overlap there's probably like 5 or 6 of guests that somehow synergistically found their way, in the guest seat on your show and then on mine. So it's, if I can bring my message to your listeners, that would be quite a privilege. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
That would be a privilege for us as well, Nikhil. We would really, really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Let's see. The listeners will vote. They'll let us know if it's something we want. But if not, I'm sure there's going to be opportunities for us to learn from you. Nikhil, the last guest left a question for you without knowing who you were. And our last guest was Neha, right? Neha Asar?
Yes, sir.
And she asked us the following question. And after you answer it, you'll get a chance to ask a question for our next guest that we don't know. And you can listen in to their episode, see how they answered it. So anyways, Neha, without knowing who you were and all the brilliance that you brought to our show, she asks, do you feel like you've made it? And if not, when will you feel like you have made it?
Do I feel like I've made it? So honestly, this is counterintuitive, and it sounds like very antithetical to the happy part of the Happy and Human podcast. But the answer is no. And I don't mean that in a self-defeating way. I just honestly feel like, because it's a continual process, we are all a work in progress or process or whatever word you want to use. So I would say the answer is no, I have not made it. And I don't think I will ever make it because, gosh, I mean, the best word I can use is impermanence. Okay. The word, and this is a beautiful philosophy, which is just not to get too tied to any outcome, not to get tied to anything, whether it's good or bad. Right. So let's say I have quote unquote made it. Let's say I have sort of followed that script, and I've talked about this on other shows where, got the good degree, got the good career, 3 kids, all the trappings, but that has to come with self-love. And I think that's something that I'm still working on. It's, I've still got a long ways to go. And I think the best way I could equate it is using math. When we talk about like going towards, what is it? Asymptotes. I don't know if you remember that word. Basically like the line towards the, zero kind of diminishes over time, but it never fully reaches that point. So that's, I'd say we're all a bunch of asymptotes.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
That's a beautiful take on it.
Yeah.
No, that's a really, really beautiful take on it.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think I fully subscribe to that theory. And I think in Neha's episode, we talked about John Maxwell, who said, if you've got a finish line, when you cross the finish line, you're finished. Right. So make it a continual process of sort of learning, growing, getting better every day. And, you'll never feel that dreaded feeling of like you're stuck or you're stagnant, right? You're always moving. And I think that is the happy part of our lives. It's not chasing this euphoric state that we achieve, but it's finding the happiness in the joy of growing. And that includes the other side of growth, which is pain, right?
Yeah.
You go through pain.
Yeah.
So what would be a question that you would like to ask for our next guest?
What template have you been following all your life, and what are you doing to break it?
What template have you been following all of your life, and what are you doing to break it? This ties into what Seema said at the beginning of our show about patterns and pattern disrupting.
Yeah. I highly recommend listeners, if you're not journaling these things that the guests have asked of other guests, do it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's such powerful questions.
Yeah, this could be like a audition for my show, because that's obviously, that's the mission of our show, is to help listeners break free of templates. So I'm dying to hear what the next guest what their take on that question is.
Yeah.
And if I could just push in what Seema said, I was actually having the same thought, that listeners, these are questions that we want you guys to answer to think about these answers and journal on them, or just in the moment while you're listening, because I think, when you ask better questions, you get better answers, right?
Yeah.
So good. Seema,
Yeah.
back to you.
Yeah. I have like 50,000 things I want to say, but for the sake of time, I'll keep this going. Okay. So Nikhil, you also know, because you've listened to our podcast, that one thing that's really central to how we do things here at Happy and Human is we want to amplify not only our guests and our listeners, but also people that don't even know we're sitting here talking to each other and doing these things. So our way of doing that is to ask you, what is a nonprofit or a cause that really resonates with you, so that as a thank you to you for coming on our show and supporting us, Dinesh and I will make a contribution to that cause, so that we can continue to amplify the work that they do. So, care to share with our listeners?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I love that feature of your show, because I really think that that's how we're going to build awareness, is aligning ourselves, not necessarily in a partnership, but just a contribution, give back to organizations that do have the infrastructure and do have the capabilities to make that change on a global level. So the one that I'm very passionate about, I'm fairly new to it, but is the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation, because I think that if we can teach kids to incorporate mindfulness and meditation into their daily activities, this is going to be a much better planet. And it's going to give, as I talked to you about, it's going to give the why behind the what of things like breathwork and meditation. So the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation is something I would love to see a contribution to.
Tell our audience, where can they find you? How can they connect with you? What's coming up for you, and what are you excited about? And I know that you're going to be a frequent resident of the Happy and Human community, not just the podcast, but everything that a Happy and Human does in the future. I think you're going to be a part of that.
Yeah, I love it. So the best way to get a hold of me is through Instagram, and that would be just my handle, which is Untether Your Life. I also have a website. It's untetheryourlife.co. You can do .com and read. Long story short, but the best URL is untetheryourlife.co. You can also find the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. It's just Untether Your Life. And yeah, I mean, in terms of collaboration, I'm always very excited. People who reach out to me on Instagram, that's Dinesh, how you and I connected. I'm also on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Nikhil Torsekar. There's some other sites like Threads and Twitter that you can just find us on Tether Your Life. But yeah, I would say Instagram and LinkedIn, and obviously the website, best ways to get a hold of me.
Yeah, so good. Just as a cliffhanger to end the show here, as I was doing some background research on you, I read something about a book and a movie. Tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, so the book is something that my wife and I worked together on. We co-authored it. It's about our lived experience with mental illness, and that could be an episode in and of itself. But yeah, we have quite a long and rich and rewarding story, I think, that will resonate with a lot of people. But it's about our journey with mental health. The title of the book is actually Untethered. It has not been published yet, but we're working on that right now. And the movie will obviously follow after that. But yeah, the book is called Untethered, and in terms of an actual publication date, that is still TBD. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up.